Hello! Sabaton just released a new song called Crossing the Rubicon. And this new song is under 4 minutes long, and in my opinion, the lyrics stay a bit more on the superficial side. So that's why I thought I'll make a video about it and explain what the song Crossing the Rubicon is all about. So in this video we'll talk about what is the Rubicon, who crossed it, why did he cross it, and what were the consequences of doing that. So the song is actually about the Roman general called Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar was born in 100 BC during the Roman Republic era. And Gaius Julius Caesar, at already a very young age, because he was born in a rich family, he was able to go to school, to study, and he showed a promising future in those times. So he was great at reading, writing, and already early on he got involved in the Roman politics. He was able to do this because he came from a noble family called the Gens Julii, and because of his background he was able to start in the political scene. At only 15 years old, in 85 BC, his father died. And this tragic event might have shaped Gaius Julius a lot, because at this point he had to become already very independent and become the father of the household of his family, the pater familias. So after that he stayed being active in politics, and he eventually also joined the army. He joined the army where he also again once more showed very promising results, and he was able to climb up the ladder. At a certain point, Rome started wars against Iberia, the current region of Spain, and Caesar was sent there as a general to fight the tribes in this region. And during his campaigns he was successful in conquering a lot of land in Spain, and at a certain point he came across a statue of Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, at that point in his life, Julius Caesar, he was already older than that Alexander the Great was when he conquered his enormous empire. So Caesar, being so ambitious as he was, this made him very emotional. And he threw himself before this statue and he wept. Because in comparison to Alexander, he had achieved almost nothing, as he says, compared to the greatness of Alexander. So at this point he makes a promise to himself to also try to achieve just as much as Alexander did in his lifetime. And this promise would start to shape the future of Caesar. He returned back to Rome after his successful campaigns in Spain, where he kept trying to work himself up in the political scene. And Caesar, he was quite successful in his career at this point, but he also had rivals. His main rival in the Senate in Rome was Pompey. Gaius Pompeius was his big rival, and to try to balance out this power in Rome, both Caesar, his rival Pompey, and the richest man in Rome called Crassus, they started a new form of government called the triumvirate. And what is this triumvirate? Well, it's just these three very powerful men ruling together over the Roman Republic. And you have to understand that the Romans, they at that point, as a form of government, they were a republic. And this was because when Rome was founded, they first had 7 kings, but some of them were tyrants, and the last king, he was a big tyrant, so the people overthrew him. They were fed up with being ruled over, by tyrants, and they started a republic. So this meant that in the Roman DNA, it was very important to be aware of a lot of concentrated power in one political figure. And during this triumvirate, it was decided, because Caesar, of course, he was not yet happy with where he was at that point. Remember the promise he made in Spain to the statue? So he went out to conquer more territory. Rome had had many wars before that point with the Gaulish tribes, and the tribes of Gaul, they were located in both the upper part of Italy, France, and modern-day Belgium. So Caesar, he asked the Senate to go to war, and he gets 5 years to conquer Gaul. Caesar, he enters Gaul with his legions, and he manages to defeat most of the tribes. After some successful wars, he goes up in Gaul, and the final tribe he conquers were the Belgians, and after that, all of the Gaulish territories were successfully brought under Roman command. And Caesar, being at the very end of the Gaulish territories, at the North Sea, he looks up across the sea, and what he sees over there is another island. This other island, yet unknown territory for the Romans, was Brittania. Brittania had already been written about at that point by the ancient Greeks, but for the Romans this was just uncharted territory. So again, Caesar, he remembered the promise he made to himself, and he just had to go over there and conquer it. So he sent some of his soldiers to Brittania to set foot on the island, but of course it's Brittania, so what happens? It rains, a big storm happens, and almost all of his legionnaires, they crash during the storm against the cliffs of Brittania, and they all die. Caesar does not give up and starts another expedition to Brittania, and eventually he also ends up there to fight against the tribes that live there. While he starts this new campaign in Brittania, his regions in Gaul that he conquered, they started to rebel against him. And there's this Gaulish war chief called Vercingetorix, who tried to unite all these different peoples in Gaul, because Gaul was not one country, there were many different tribes, and all these tribes, he tried to unite them against these Romans ruling over them. And he was quite successful in this, because Caesar, when he was in Britannia, he had to return to Gaul to end this rebellion. At this point, Caesar had been campaigning for more than 5 years, which was actually the term that was agreed upon, but he has to continue these wars against the Gauls, and after a bloody war and a siege at Alesia, he defeats this uprising by Vercingetorix. So at that point he had many military victories, and he goes back to Rome. During these years that he was at war, he had created a very strong bond with his legions. So the soldiers that had campaigned with him for all those years, they were quite loyal not just to Rome, but to Caesar specifically in person. So Caesar, he goes back from Gaul to Rome, and he takes these legions with him. While he was campaigning in Gaul and Britannia for 10 years, not just 5 years, as was agreed upon, but 10 years, a lot has happened in Rome. The triumvirate, remember the three people, the three rich Romans ruling together over the Republic. The richest man in Rome, called Crassus, who was actually a supporter of Caesar, he had himself died in a military campaign in the east against the Parthians, so this leaves Rome with two rulers. Caesar on the one hand, and Pompey on the other. And Pompey, while Caesar was gone for so long, he said to the Roman people, this guy has way too much power, and especially the term for his wars was 5 years, and he has been campaigning for 10 years at this point. So he tries to convince them that Caesar is a tyrant. This was actually a lie told by Pompey against the peoples, because somewhere during his campaigns it was agreed that it would have been extended to 10 years. So this was a lie, but Pompey grew very weary of the power that Caesar was amassing, and he used the fear of the Roman people for an authoritarian king figure as a head of state, and he said, like, Caesar, you should really watch out for him because he's trying to reach that status. He was doing all this, of course, just to preserve his own power, but Caesar had heard of these rumors of what was happening in Rome. So, of course, when he returned back to Rome, he knew that a rival, an enemy, was waiting at the gates, and not just a military parade trying to welcome him back into the city. And that's when Caesar from Gaul goes back into Italy, and when he's back into Italy, he comes across this river. This river is called the Rubicon. So now, what is so important about this river? Well, the Rubicon was the border between the province region of Rome itself, the Roman Republic, and the next province, which was historically a Gaulish province. And to protect Rome from these tyrants, as I said, it was strictly forbidden by law for a general who had done a successful campaign to return with his army and cross with those legions the river Rubicon. Crossing the river Rubicon with your army would be an act of war and a sign that you were heading for Rome and you wanted to take the power for yourself. But of course, Caesar, being so ambitious and knowing that this was actually becoming a battle between him and Pompey, he crossed the Rubicon with his legions, and while crossing the Rubicon, he said, "Alia iacta est." And what does this mean? It means the die is cast and that there is no turning back. So that is where this phrase comes from. Crossing the Rubicon means doing something which creates as a consequence that you can never go back to the state before. And Caesar, he crosses the Rubicon, he takes his legions with him, and he marches onto Rome, expecting Pompey to be there with his army. When he enters Rome, he sees that the city is actually empty and that Pompey has fled. Pompey, he knew that his army was not strong enough to fight off Caesar, so he did a tactical retreat to Greece, where he was trying to find more reinforcements. So now at this point, Caesar has openly started a civil war by crossing the Rubicon, and this is also what happens. He arrives in Rome, Pompey isn't there, and this is very much the start of a long civil war that Caesar would actually eventually win. So Caesar, he had crossed the Rubicon, he started the civil war, he won the civil war. That means that at this point he actually does become somewhat of this very powerful authoritarian figure as the head of state. After the war, he gets called Dictator Perpetuo, which means an eternal dictator, and his political position, it means that it does not have an end date. And as I said before, the people in Rome were very wary, especially the Senate itself, of this form of government. They did not want to have a king figure as the head of state. So, as we all know, in the end, Caesar, he gets assassinated in Rome because of this. Thank you very much for following this video. I hope it was very informative about the subject of crossing the Rubicon. Also, please tell me what you thought of the song itself from Sabaton, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye!